welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? I'm your host, Lou Sitzer, and this is a series of productions dealing with local issues that have greater than local impact. Hopefully that issues that will help us become better educated locally, nationally, and even globally. The series will air on Nevada County Television and the internet and will be archived on our nevadacountytv.org website. We have with us Nancy Weber, who is the Division I representative of the Nevada Irrigation District, also known as NID. NID is looking at and proposing a dam entitled the Centennial Dam, and we're going to be investigating that with Nancy. Welcome, Nancy, to the show.
Thank you very much.
And before we get into deeply issues of the dam, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what got you interested in NID?
I'm a native of Maine. I grew up on the northern border of Maine, right next to New Brunswick. Irish family during the Depression. We spent a lot of time talking about politics, small town politics. I am, first of all, an RN, and I practiced for 25 years as an RN, emergency medicine, orthopedics. Then I got involved in schools and got a school nurse credential and worked as a school nurse for quite a few years, mainly because it gave me hours and vacations that would jive with my job of raising 5 kids as a single mother. And then I moved to Nevada County 27 years ago, and after hiding out for a year, I got involved in politics for the first time, really actively involved, and been involved ever since.
And you've been on the NID board now for 19 years.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you're the longest serving member of the board.
No. There were Paul Williams from the Lincoln area served 29 years.
I meant presently.
Presently, oh yes, yeah.
So your basically your historical memory will serve us well, just to recount maybe some of the endeavors of NID. But in particular, what got you interested in NID?
I had a terrible well 3 years after I bought a house in the county. My well went bad, and it cost a lot of money. And one of my neighbors said I could hook up on an adjoining road, and I could go through his property. And I got the easements, and NID said, yes, you can do it. And after I got the water line in, they said, no, you can't. And that meeting was held without me. It was a public meeting, but I wasn't invited. And it got my dander up. So.
That seems to be happening right now in the community because NID is looking at this dam. It's getting the dander up from a number of people in the public. And one of the things I've noted in the notes for the show is that it's going to be a community-wide effort to look at and approve the dam. And of course, it's going to involve state and federal agencies. So what is the attitude presently, you think, an idea in working with community groups?
I have to be careful what I say because I have to live with what I say. I've learned this over the 19 years, is be careful. I don't think the current board is familiar with the experience of an activist community like Western Nevada County. There has been an emphasis from the beginning, I think, to minimize the involvement of the community. Originally, we were going to have an advisory committee made up of mostly nonprofits and agencies, resource agencies, and that didn't happen. And so over the last 2 years, it's become more insular. The information about the dam has not been forthcoming as easily as it could be, and so we now have an impasse, I think, in a very unhealthy situation. Board meetings are PTSD time. it has to be resolved, I think, as soon as possible so that we can go on and deal with other things that are important.
Right, and I recognize that you play a role as a mediator with the board, that you are doing your best to build bridges and to move communication forward between the board and the community.
I have to take rests now and then. People get tired of listening to the same thing over and over, and I want to get along. I really want to be, as much as I can, working with the board and not being an antagonist. So I would say sometimes I work harder at it than others.
Okay. So later on, we're going to be interviewing more folks from NID and getting a broader picture. We'll also be interviewing people who represent community views, whether they're indigenous peoples, nonprofits, water agencies. So it's going to be a comprehensive look at the dam proposal. And could you kind of let us know where we are now in the process? Where would you mark it to be?
I'd like to mark it differently. That's my first thought. Supposedly the EIR is coming out in fourth quarter of this year. Water rights are a part. They're not part of the environmental impact report, but they're crucial in whether we get to have the dam or not. And that authority comes from the State Water Resources Control Board. Unknown timeline as far as I can see. I don't see when we will ever get those rights. So I would be a bit skeptical about it happening this year, but I feel strongly that we can't continue to go down the route that we are now. So what needs to happen is, and this is part of an environmental impact report, we need to have a better understanding of the need for the project, which is where we could have started. So really a very detailed, maybe more than 1 or 2 town halls explaining the need. We need to have all of the alternatives, for instance, getting the sediment out of the reservoirs, raising the height of one of the dams, conservation. We'll only plug the big leaks because the little leaks are good for habitat. Sorry, circle. All of those alternatives need to be studied and see how much water we can come up with that way. And then, if we need a dam, yeah. But I do feel that we have a very unhealthy situation currently because of the prolonged effort and the dissent that it's created.
Right. And so we're going to be looking at this issue for a while and weighing the options and investigating. When you talk about water rights, what does that actually mean?
Well, I'm not an authority on water rights, but water rights are not as good as property rights. The legal process that gave us water rights as a venue for deciding who owns what are not as strong as property rights are. And so they're very complicated. They're area of origin rights, which NID has. They're close to the source of the water. We're not actually at the origin. It's northernmost Sierra, further up in elevation in the other counties. There are riparian rights. If you live on a stream, you get to use that water for your own use. You can't store it and do other things with it. If your rights were prior to 1914, those are the best you can get. And then people have perfected their water rights down through the years, so those have lesser standing. So it's a really complicated situation, and it's just great for statewide water dilemmas.
So I raise it because there is the notion that the state has the authority to come in and take water from NID or wherever the water companies are operating, and that there's complementing that is the idea that if the NID doesn't build the dam, the state may do something to help its own water issues.
Well, I don't think the state would build a dam, first of all. Maybe I'm missing something there, but I don't know, with all the complications of trying to manage the water and an agency that has people depart after 6 months and 1 year, and it'd be difficult to build a dam. So, but the state definitely at the legislative level can intervene on water rights. And they actually did that in what was it? I have to look at my notes, 15 to 17, when they curtailed our ability to store water for some of our water rights. So we actually had to buy water from PG&E, which we do fairly often, but we had to buy a greater quantity, I believe. And so
I think during the drought, maybe PG&E was used as a water resource.
Right.
The recent drought.
Yeah. So anything can happen at the state level, and I'm very concerned about some of the actions that are taking place that might lead to that sooner than later.
So even if the dam were not built and water became more dire in the state, there's the possibility the state could still come in and do something.
Yes.
Right.
They would start with the water rights back in 1914. Those are the most sacred. So they'd leave those aside, and the more recent ones, 1970, 1990, whatever, they would go back, and they actually did that during the drought. Yeah.
So then some of the options that are being discussed, I know, besides the fixing of leaks and so forth, are areas like conservation, restoration, and these are being talked about not only by NID, but also by the nonprofit agencies and public that would like to see other avenues pursued in lieu of a dam. What so far has NID done in those areas?
2 years ago, we hired, she's called a Watershed Resources Planner, a gal with a strong science background who's worked for a watershed group in California before. We have a meadow restoration going on at English Meadows, where grazing has pretty much made their own waterways, the cows have. Cattle, I think they're called. We have started a forestry management program with Kevin Whitlock, who is a very competent person in coordination with our NID staff person, Nasa King. And we have forestry management projects going on at Scotts Flat. And these are sort of, at this point, pilot projects. We are a pioneer in the state, and with the help of Sierra Fund, got a grant for $6.2 million to use a piece of equipment that NID bought from a Canadian firm that is both a dredge and a centrifuge. And so it can get the mercury out of the reservoirs so that we can get the sediment out, because until we decide what to do with the mercury and find a good way to deal with it, then we can't harvest the sediment. And about 25% of the reservoirs, the lower ones especially, have sediment in them from gold mining days.
So that dredging process, has it begun, or you're saying it's still waiting?
No, it's starting right away, yeah.
And I've heard that there's some not only water savings, but could be some revenue actually derived from that process.
Well, there's gold.
Right. And mercury for what that's worth.
Yes, right, yeah. Actually, a centrifuge spins off different weight metals at different times, so you're able to capture those. So, but that really hasn't been
clearly defined as to what the sort of financial bottom line of that would be.
In terms of cost to NID?
Cost and revenue derived.
Oh, revenue? Well, there's a gold market for this sort of gold because it isn't depleting resources. It's recovering. And so there's a specialty market for jewelry making. I don't think there's a lot of money in it. We've been really fortunate to get this piece of equipment, and we are the pilot project for the state on this, and that's how we've gotten the money. I don't see any money coming from. The sediment, once we get the mercury out of it, can be used for certain things.
So the public perception that, gee, ideas only focused on a dam is really not accurate in the
That's
sense
true.
that it's really dispersed in its attempts to look at water.
Yes.
Yeah.
And watershed improvement, I'd rather say it in a different way. Watershed restoration, emphasis on watersheds, not just pipes. When I first went on the NID board, it was pipes and reservoirs. Now the movement at the state level, it isn't just NGOs here, non-government organizations here. It's throughout the state. There's an emphasis on watershed health.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, of course, which needs to happen because water is becoming a very scarce commodity and will continue to be one as climate changes, as we're noting. So let's take a break, come back in a bit and pursue some more questions and in-depth look at the Centennial Dam.
This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stiefel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Eric Thome, and I'll be here for the next half hour with Otis Wollan of the Bear River Watershed Institute. This is a program, Where Do We Go From Here, that investigates local issues, things occurring in Nevada County and its environments, which we think may have a greater than local interest or may draw us into thinking about the larger world in ways that we don't normally do. It's a series of programs that will be cablecast over NCTV over the next several weeks and months, giving different opinions on these various issues. Several weeks ago, we began a series on homelessness in Nevada County. Right now, we're discussing the proposed Centennial Dam, which the Nevada Irrigation District would like to put on the Bear River. As I said, this evening I'm talking with Otis Wollan, who is a former member of the Placer County Water Agency.
Correct. We're on the board for 20 years.
On the board for 20 years, and has been a resident of both Nevada County and Placer County.
Correct. It's about 1971.
Now, when you first came up here in '71, you told me before we began that you grew up in Southern Illinois, then went to Stanford, and then discovered that living up here was more important than going to school.
Yeah. No, we decided, my wife and I, who I met basically at Stanford, decided that this was the most wonderful place in the world. And we loved the water, we loved the hills, we loved to be this close to the mountains. And
if you know that, what more is there to
what
learn?
more do you want to do? Where else would you be?
Okay. And in that point, you started out in Nevada County on Wolf Road, but I guess it got a little too crowded for you? Like Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone, you had to laid out for the territory?
Yeah, we became surrounded by a kind of neighborhood we hadn't anticipated. We hadn't looked at the planning and zoning, and it just filled out with all kinds of things that were different. So we moved across the river and paid a little bit more attention. We find ourselves right in a beautiful place on a canyon on 18 acres that is right near Placer Land Trust land, right near the Bear River Campground, which is owned by the state of California and leased by Placer County. And it's just one of the most beautiful places that you'd ever want to be.
Well, for me, the Bear River, in addition to being a beautiful place, is also a very strict demarcation zone that when I cross the Bear River, which I try to do as rarely as possible, I think I'm approaching the part of the world I also tried to leave a long time ago. So sometimes I go maybe 5 months or so without crossing the river, and I sometimes feel the better for it. Mm-hmm. But I think you may have found a better solution to living around here. Instead of considering it a boundary, you consider it sort of a collecting place.
Oh, it's a great place. It's and we were lucky to find a real hideout next to one of the most precious spots.
And for you, you can go from one side of the river to the other and feel totally at home.
Absolutely.
Well, I envy you. Now, you were on the Placer County Water Board.
Yeah.
or agency for 20 years. How did you get into that? Because you were living on the river?
I was really enjoyed the river. Became a kayaker and rafter, and enjoyed the values there. And I really got involved because of Auburn Dam. It was a major invasion, I thought, of one of the most beautiful rivers on that side of the ridge. And being on the board, it was a surprise to virtually everyone that I got elected. But I conveyed my love for the place. And working with Placer County Water Agency, you get on the board, you get an appreciation for what we have as resources, as our existing systems, how they serve water and power, and how they provide recreation, and how they do all kinds of things. But there's a point at which you don't want to cross. There's a point where too much is too much. And we actually are in a condition of abundance and plenty. And that was a proposal that failed because of finances. And lo and behold, 40 years later, Nevada Irrigation District proposes a reservoir that would lap at the very bottom acre of our 20 acres. And so I started to pay very close attention to what was going on with this proposal.
And then you got involved with, or you were already involved with the American River Watershed Institute?
Right. Yeah, we have a project called Bear River Awakening. We have a website called bearriver.us, which really is looking at the restoration and the rejuvenation of the entire watershed. So here, right in the middle of the watershed, right in one of the most precious spots, and right next to the property that I have, comes this proposal. And I got interested.
Okay, I should say that the website is fascinating, and a lot of the geological and cultural history that's involved in it about the river taught me things that I did not know before.
Absolutely, yeah. BearRiver.us has been a wonderful project. We were tracking all the FERC relicensings for both the NID and for the Pacific Gas and Electric, and we're engaged for the last 20 years in both of those efforts.
You told me before we began taping that you like to go into things in detail, and I see you brought at least 4 long papers on this topic. And I'd like to go into each of them. Not each of them; they're all too long. But at least
we could
find out about
Sure.
what you think. The first one is just opinion paper on potential Centennial project costs and revenues.
Well, having been dealing with the Auburn Dam for 40 years before everybody realized that it was so expensive it could never happen. I became interested. So I went to a Meta Vista Municipal Advisory Council in 2015, one of the first, where Rem Schusinger made a presentation, and he said that this dam was going to cost $160 million. Well, that was about 1.5% of what the Auburn Dam would be, and I just shook my head and said, I don't think this guy knows what he's doing. And so now the cost has gone up to soon $320 million, then it went to $380-some million. They just put in a proposal for California Water, the California Water Commission, and the commission came back with the revised cost estimate of $490 million. Well, in this paper, I had a $500 million with a present net value of $600 million, and when you issue bonds on that, you're up to $1.2 billion. And so basically in the paper, I track where I got my figures, and NID is quickly catching up to what I had put out about a year ago. In fact, it was exactly a year ago in January we represented the paper to their board. Yeah, it doesn't seem to have informed them to the point where they're believing it. They're coming to a point of belief. Now the state of California says this is a $500 million project. And in the paper, I started going into what happens when you issue bonds. For one thing, every month you start sending your money to bankers in New York. When you construct the dam, these are not local jobs. These are jobs from Bechtel and other kinds of major multinational corporate construction firms. And so your money goes out of the area. So here's just a case and a snapshot of way too much money, utterly unaffordable for the community, takes the community's money and sends it out of the community. And here we are in a circumstance where we actually have an abundant resource. There's nothing to be afraid of. We have all we need, and we still haven't really gone down the track of using what we have in a smart way.
What would that smart way be?
Well, Nevada Irrigation District never joined the California Urban Water Conservation Council, which had the best management practices in the memorandum of understanding, and they still haven't offered their customers and invested in their customers for a single one of the best management practices. No toilet rebates, no rebates for turf removal, no rebates for washing machines, no audits that are effective. So they have yet to begin to use their water in a smart way. Lots of waste in the raw water delivery, the ditch water systems. They have yet to begin. So the future is actually very rich. You can invest in these things and the money stays local.
Okay, your second paper here is Camp Far West Reservoir Spill as an Indicator of Water Supply Availability in the Bear River System for Centennial Reservoir.
Yeah.
It's a mouthful, but...
It's a mouthful, but what it basically stemmed out of was living on the river when they said, we're going to build a reservoir here. I said, well, that's interesting. I live here. I look at the amount of water that goes down the river. I don't think you got enough water for the project. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking at this quite seriously and looking at it over time. We've found out from tree rings since about 800 AD. We've got an 1,100, 1,200 year record of 100-year cycles where it's wetter, drier, wetter, drier. And NID in their proposal is using 1976 to 2014, which is the wettest 50 years in the 100-year cycles. So dependably, we will have even less water. What I'm showing is that they don't have enough water to fill this dam without seriously damaging the downstream dam, which is owned by South Sutter Water District. So they can dewater that dam. That's 140 farmers, most of them rice farmers. So they do damage there, and if they actually pull water out of that system, the farmers are going to go back on groundwater, which is why Camp Far West was built in 1964, because they were lowering the groundwater beneath the city of Lincoln by 1.5 to 3 feet per year. Mm-hmm. So they were starving the groundwater basin, and that's why Camp Far West got built. Well, the story actually has some very clear indicators. When NID applied for water rights at the State Water Resources Control Board, South Sutter Water Agency from Camp Far West filed a protest. Placer County Water Agency filed a protest because they're the groundwater steward in Placer County. County of Placer filed a protest. These are all based on potential damage to the groundwater basin, potential damage to the farmers of Placer County.
And when was that?
That was now a year ago was when they filed. So
has the case been decided?
Oh no, it won't be even heard probably for another 18 months. Mm-hmm. They need to finish their environmental documentation first, and the environmental impact report is now scheduled for fall of 2018. Still a long way off.
So it would seem that there's no point in proceeding with the dam right now just for that one reason.
Oh, I think there's not just that one reason. There's just many reasons.
Okay.
Well, sitting next door to it, if you're going to be taking that much water, that reservoir is going to have an enormous bathtub ring and annual usage. They've now done a study with the Association of California Water Agencies that says they're going to try to sell that water to Southern California to pay for it. That's strip mining our water resource for export. And so Nick Wilcox likes to kid me because I live right on the edge of what he thinks would be a beautiful reservoir. And I say, Nick, I know enough to see that reservoir as a strip mine of our local resource for the purposes of export. This is going to be a major invasion in our community that will export our water, export our money. This is not about taking care of us. This is about laying a burden of debt on ourselves, the ratepayers and the taxpayers of this area. It's going to put the burden on us to subsidize the export of both of our money and our resources. This is foolishness from the ground up.
Okay. Then your next paper has probably the largest set of consequences, climate change and Centennial Dam.
Yeah.
Give
Well,
that a try.
this is just NID is selling this dam as a climate change alternative, and this is the most simplistic view is that in a world that is warmer, there will not be snowpack, which you can rely on for storage. It's going to fall as rain. You have to build a bucket to capture it because you lose your snowpack. That's an incredibly simplistic idea. It's true, but it's only the beginning of climate change. Probably the most dramatic has been the last 30 years. And there have been two studies that have been really important. The one came out of the Colorado River. We know from the last 30 years, we are 1.6 degrees centigrade warmer. And they had what they called a drought in the Colorado Basin. Mm-hmm. Except the drought was under conditions of almost normal rainfall. It was about watershed yield. They weren't getting the water in the river. So University of Colorado and University of Arizona, a team began studying that, and what they found was that when it's warmer, plants need to draw more water up to cool themselves. Makes sense. When there's no snowpack, the dormant season disappears. So you're evapotranspiring over a longer period of time. And as things open up in the upper elevations, the lower elevation plants begin to move in and fill in the empty spaces because nature abhors a void. So you're evapotranspiring faster over a longer period of time with more biomass. And what happens? The water doesn't reach the river. You lose watershed yield. You lose 7% of watershed yield per degree centigrade. We know we're going to go up 4 degrees centigrade by 2070. That's a requirement of California Water Commission for a proposal for a dam like this. That means that you're going to have 30% less water in the watershed. In any case, that's not projections. I mean, that's not scenarios. That's based on what we know from what we've experienced. The scenarios are all over a map. They're all over the map.
Now that, one of the few positives I've been able to draw from the fact that we're going to be getting more rain and less snow, therefore the reservoirs would not fill as well, but I thought that might increase the amount of groundwater. But it sounds like from what you're saying, that's probably not the case.
Oh, no, not the case. Probably again, we know that in that warmed world, you're going to have more water molecules in the air, and they're going to be more agitated because they're going to be warmer. But if you look at the last 30 years, these scenarios are 25% of them say it's going to be drier here, 25% say it's going to be wetter here. The middle 50% say it's going to go this way and that way. But if you look what happened over the last 30 years, and NOAA and NASA have done this, they have seen the storm track moving further to the north. Mm-hmm. That's what these dry periods are all about. We're in the midst of one right now. The storm track goes to the north of us. It's a big mound of warm water off the coast and the loopy jet streams that we're seeing. So what we know from the last 30 years is the storm track is on the move. We know that we're going to have less water because of what they're calling hot drought. And so, to take the one simple idea of, oops, going to lose a snowpack, got to build a bucket. That's just foolishness. We know enough to know that it's going to be uncertain and it's going to be messy. And if you've got $1 billion you want to invest, probably the dumbest investment you could do is in some kind of a brittle single idea. You want to be investing in a whole portfolio of ideas. Where do we inject groundwater? Where do we save through conservation? How do we change people's minds in landscaping ideas? How do we understand and change what crops are going to look like here? That's what it's about. It's about investing in our people here. It's not about some fancy idea that's going to serve someone from outside of the area, both financially and with water. So,
Now, what I've heard is that California is using about 30% less water now than, I don't remember what the benchmark year was, but maybe 20 years ago, in spite of an increasing population because of conservation methods. Is that roughly accurate?
oh yeah, and NIDs save 30%. They save 30% just because of the ambient message of drought. They still didn't do toilet rebates. They still didn't do any of these rebates. They've got no program investing in their customers. This is horrible. It's just the wrong way of doing business.
Now, the last of your papers is the shortest one, and it's just potential Centennial Dam project impacts on Placer County. And I noticed that it has a number of things like environmental and habitat impacts, but also things I wouldn't have, well, one is water rights and water security, and things like public health and traffic circulation and safety.
Absolutely.
Can you fit all these together in
Sure.
20 words?
What's happening, interestingly, no one has representation on the Placer County side of this project. The Nevada Irrigation District border and boundary is the Bear River. So this is affecting us in Placer County, and we don't have an elected person.
There's
even
one
a little-
representative.
No. That person represents Placer County's south end.
Okay.
Up where we are, there is no district, and there's no elected official. So one of the local bumper stickers was "No inundation without representation." So, these are 25 homes that would be inundated. They would be taken by eminent domain. Another 100 parcels would be taken by eminent domain. They've basically broken the real estate market. And what do we live on up here? It's all about real estate and building houses, and that's our primary thing. Then you've got recreation. Placer County has invested millions of dollars in the Bear River campground, in the roads, in the bridges, the access to it, in the campground itself, in the day use area, and that would of course be inundated, and it would be replaced by a ridgetop thing way on the Nevada County side. So you got two counties, and you're creating a win-loss. On one county is going to be losing a bunch of stuff, the other county is going to be gaining a bunch of stuff. Our county supervisor just wrote a pretty scathing letter about this project and its impacts on Placer County.
And has NID responded, or is it too early?
No, the response has to show up in the environmental impact report.
And that's not due till the fall.
Exactly. The city of Colfax has written 6 pages of questions that will not get answered until next fall. They're saying, hey, you're building a bridge across the canyons that's going to essentially be turning our whole premier area of residence into a commuter corridor. That will be the preferred way of getting from Grass Valley, Alta Sierra, Lake of the Pines, Dark Horse, those whole areas. They will want to jump on that road, shoot across the canyon, right through Meta Vista, right through Weimar Applegate, right by the schools on every direction. These are some of the favorite bicycle routes. What we're doing on that side is we're doing riverine-based recreation. We're doing 100-mile runs, 100-mile bike rides. These are roads that are being used for recreation. And this is going to transform it into the preferred, they will prefer taking that road and that bridge across the canyon to Route 49 or Route 174 to get to I-80. So you're looking at a community that's saying, hey, you're going to change us from a premier place to live and recreate into a commuter corridor. No thanks.
There's already one North Auburn.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
And I'm just curious about this one other one. Well, traffic circulation, that's pretty much what you were handling.
Exactly right there. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the last probably question I have is, environmental impact reports are usually not done by government agencies. They're usually outsourced. Do you know who's doing it in this case?
Oh, yeah, well, NID is the principal agency sponsoring their consultant is MBK, is doing their hydrology, and they have a couple of different consultants now. They're bringing in a kind of a different team, it looks like. Yeah, NID does this one, the environmental impact statement, which is the federal level. The Army Corps of Engineers is the principal agency, and they also have their consultants.
Now, quite often EIRs and EISs come out at very different times. Are these going to be coordinated, or?
A lot of agencies do them as coordinated documents. For whatever reason. NID did not. So you have basically two separate documents, and we'll just see how that goes. The federal has a bit of a different emphasis. We'll just see what happens there. But I think the key battle is going to be basically at the ballot box, fall of 2018, fall of 2020. They won't start this project till the fall or till probably 2021 or 2022 at the earliest. So you're going to have local fights. I mean, there are 5 people that are going to make this decision, and I think they have a track record both on management and board level of making very bad decisions to date on this over the last 3 years. We've only got one board member who is questioning whether this is a viable project, and she's being very sane. I think the other board members are acting as promoters, and that's just not appropriate. If all of us say, like in my white papers, I say, hey, look at this. They say, oh, well, we can't talk about that because our environmental impact report, our project description is not out yet. Yet, on the other hand, they'll go promoting this thing as if it was the best thing to ever happen.
And buying up land.
Buying land, they've started on the project, which is very questionable. That's how they broke the real estate market. And even if this project doesn't happen, they're committed to buy that land for the rest of time. The threat of this has broken that market. So fortunately, there's no lack of resource. We're going to be just fine. We need to invest locally in what we need to do here with everything. The tools on the table are totally appropriate and totally sufficient. There's no reason to be as risky and as harmful as this project would be.
Thank you so much, Otis Wollan, for these criticisms. These are by far the most comprehensive, and I would say, to my opinion, damaging criticisms of the Centennial Dam project I've heard yet. We will be cablecasting this program along with other input from other involved agencies and people in the next few weeks. They'll be on Monday evenings at 7, and we'll get to hear how NID responds to these very critical statements and what other people have to say. The big question is, where do we go from here? And this is going to be a tough one to answer.